Welcome, everybody, to Soccer 101. Thank you, as always, for joining us. My name is Taylor Rockwell, and this week we're talking about a topic that mirrors the history of soccer itself. It's football pitches. The evolution of soccer pitches reflects the game's journey from casual pastime to global professional sport. What began as simple fields of varying quality, but usually poor quality, transformed into engineering systems designed to optimize player safety, ball movement, consistent playability throughout the year, utilizing some crazy technology that I did not know existed. Graham Ruthven, was there any particular bit of technology you learned about in preparing for this show that you either didn't know about or became fascinated by, or maybe slightly intimidated by, as was the case for me?
Hello, Taylor Rockwell. I think the heat lamps, which I have seen in stadiums previously, they always appeal to me as a Scot. I just think just get underneath them, get a nice summer glow. They always appeal to me, and they're always huge as well. They must be so expensive. I did look into the price of a number of different things. I didn't look into the price of those lamps. I imagine those are not cheap.
For me, it was the computerized irrigation where I knew that they did the player tracking and the player performance tracking where how many sprints they ran and what was their top speed and distance covered and everything. But to know the individual moisture levels of certain parts of the pitch and how to then adjust the seating to make sure that it does it's too much, Graham. It's too much knowledge. I don't know if we need to know that much about lawn care.
Well, you should tell some of the people who live around me.
Before
we started recording, there was a person outside your window, I believe, Taylor.
Still going.
Mowing their lawn. Just open the window, ask that guy, do you want to come on the show, talk about hybrid pitches?
Based on his technology, I'm going to assume that he is not big on hybrid pitches and does not have a computerized moisture monitor level, but he does have Bluetooth headphones that I'm going to assume are cranking classic rock, which is a requirement for any sort of lawn care. You have to be listening to that at all times.
Did rule.
Yeah, it's the rule. It's the rule. So, Graham, let's go back a bit here. So, my idea is that it is a more modern creation, the artificial pitch. Is that a fair thing to say, that historically football has been played on grass, or theoretically grass, if not mud and dirt?
Yeah, theoretically, grass is a key point. I mean, it depends how far back you go, right? So, yes, in terms of the codified game that the Football Association laid out in when was that, 1863 or something? Sheffield Rules is what that codification is known as. Yes, since then, soccer has always been played on grass, or that's been the aim. We can talk about some of the decades where there wasn't much grass present. And largely that was because around about that time, cricket was the most popular sport in England, where obviously the sport was popularised initially. And so that sport had a head start, and there were grass pitches, and so they would use those grass pitches. So the first Scotland-England match, which is the first international match in soccer history, is played on a cricket pitch in Glasgow. So that was part of it. But of course, football was a concept before then, and you have all kinds of different variations that were played in China and Scandinavia and all over the world. And so some of those variations would be played on stone or even in mud or dirt fields. But yeah, it's been played on grass largely, with the exception of the introduction of artificial pitches in the 70s is when they start to become a thing. I think Luton Town have a plastic pitch around that time. Stirling Albion infamously were the first Scottish team to have a plastic pitch, and if you ask people of a certain vintage, they will tell you about the plastic pitch we had at Anfield before we moved to Forth Bank, and we now have a grass pitch. But they were very different to the artificial pitches that you will now find, which people still complain about them, and I think some of that is valid, but still very different to the 4G and 5G pitches that you will get in stadiums in 2025.
I wonder if the people behind artificial pitches see that as a slight, calling it a plastic pitch, because there's so much technology that goes into it and they take it so seriously. I'm going to guess they don't love that description, but also kind of apt, so I'm good with it. A question for you from the history of the sport, Graham. How far back do you think you could go and still have a surface that is more or less representative of a modern soccer pitch? Maybe not a state-of-the-art pitch, but you get what I'm saying. One that you could show up and be oh yeah, short grass, uniform level, not completely soaked in water, not being grazed on by cattle. How far back do you think we're looking?
My gut wants to say mid-90s. I think you can even go up to
Wait,
until...
you mean like 1990s or you mean like mid-1950s? Or like
Yeah,
1950s?
you're saying like broadly, when do pitches become kind of what we recognise them as
Yes.
today?
Yeah.
I think like early to mid 90s. Like if you look at some of the
Really?
like late 80s, yeah, like some of the pitches in the late 80s,
Wow.
and maybe this is an English centric or UK centric answer. Maybe it was slightly different in Spain or Italy, where they have nicer weather and more conducive to growing a pitch. But yeah, when you look at British football, I think even like I see some of the videos of things like Arsenal's Invincibles run in the early 2000s, or Manchester United winning the treble or whatever. And the pitches at the elite level are nowhere near the standard that they are now.
Yeah.
So I think you look at the last 30 years and the advancements that have been made, and yeah, there's some serious progress there.
That's a really interesting point, because I would have said like the 50s or the 60s is, you get someone out there mowing the lawn, it's going to look like an amateur pitch probably. But you're totally right that like I remember kickers games, even in like the early 2000s, if not like the late 90s, where it was sort of like, oh, it's the end of the season. We know it's going to be a mud ball. It just is what it is. There's no hope in regrowing grass or making it look like the pitch it looked like at the beginning of the season. And rarely do you get that these days, unless it's like an intentional tactic by a team to disrupt what the other team is trying to do. Generally speaking, I think the technology has advanced to the point where you're going to have grass there in August and you're going to have it in May, and likely you're going to have it in between.
Yeah, I found a good article on the UEFA site about what pitch care was like back in the day. Some of the stories are absolutely amazing. So one of the stories was about Bill Shankly coming in at Liverpool, and he was someone who he was kind of like an Arsene Wenger figure for Liverpool. He wants to come in, modernise the club, progress the club, look at different ways of doing things. And so he asked to put water sprinklers on before a game, only to be told that there weren't any, that Liverpool did not have any water sprinklers at Anfield. It was not something that they'd used before. Apparently clubs, this bit was almost unbelievable. Apparently, it's on the UEFA site, so if it's not true, blame UEFA. Apparently clubs would also use flamethrowers to thaw ice before games as well. And of course, what would happen if you just put a naked flame on a pitch? It burns the grass. So you'd just be playing on pure mud. So yeah, there'd be no ice, but there'd equally be no grass. That's what they used to do back in the day.
What I was prepared for was for you to be like, yeah, it was a controlled burn, the way you like burn out like growth in forests so that then you get new growth and you kind of keep things stable. No, they were just melting ice with a flamethrower. That's a good way to do it. I was also picturing hand watering and that going away once you have irrigation systems, but I'm assuming somewhere there is the like hipster club that uses like artisanal hand watering to get a more authentic grass pitch. I don't think that is necessarily what the modern clubs are going for, but yes, St. Pauli probably have hand watering. Graham, we have done episodes in the past on pitch size and dimension and the like. Let's have a refresher very briefly. One of, I think, the most interesting, unique things about like soccer, genuinely, is that you don't have one set dimension. I find that fascinating that you don't have every single team playing the exact same dimensions, which makes sense historically because you're going to have variation in the way it's played in the country that it's being played, in the availability of land and all that, but it also then ends up kind of influencing the way teams might play, national teams might play, clubs might play, because you can have variety in size.
Have you ever spoken to a non-soccer person about that and their confusion? The fact that there isn't a standard size for a pitch, and when you take a step back and think about it, it is a little bit weird. Like tennis courts are all regulation tennis courts are all the same size.
Oh, yeah, this tennis court is 2 feet wider.
Yeah,
no big deal. Wait, what? That's a huge deal.
But like in soccer, that's the way it is. But there are some dimensions that are codified by IFAB law. That's been in code for the last 3 decades now, and that code is the length of a pitch must be between 100 yards, which is 90 metres, and 130 yards, which is 120 metres, and the width must not be less than 50 yards, which is 45 metres, and not more than 100 yards, which is 90 metres. So quite a lot of variation there. Like, we're not talking about like a couple metres here and there. We're talking about a large percentage that can be different from pitch to pitch. And I can understand the confusion, but I like the variety that it brings. I like that it lends itself to different tactical approaches. So Barcelona, for example, always have the largest pitch possible so they can play their expansive style of play. Stoke City, on the other hand, used to bring the sidelines in so that Rory Delap could launch throw-ins into the box. And I like that variety that it brings.
And I think managers have and different clubs have done different things. Like there was a story of Sir Alex Ferguson, I think, like telling the grounds crew to pull the lines in a little bit when they were playing against a team that wanted to have the ball out wide, and so you can like limit the effect of that versus a team that's going to try to condense things. He would try to make the pitch a little bit bigger and have the grounds crew just paint those lines a little bit further out. And if you are trying to kind of find a gauge for how big the field itself is. I know I've just said field, Graham. I apologize. I hope you're okay with that. I hope you can endure.
I'll
that
survive,
seems to be,
just as long as you don't say cleats.
See, there it is. That's one of the three. Field, cleats, soccer. I guess those are the three that seem to annoy the English the most.
I have no issue with soccer, no issue with PK, no issue with field.
Overtime.
Cleats is the one. Or maybe overtime.
Yep. But if you want a way to kind of understand the size of the pitch, one that I really enjoy is when you see a team take a corner, you will usually see on the other side of the end line, there'll be like a little hash mark. And that's because when a corner is being taken, a player can't come within 10 yards of the taker.
Yep.
So there's usually a line there to delineate like where the player can stand, how close they can stand, so the official doesn't have to measure it every single time. And that can tell you, because if you have that line and then you have 10 yards and then the 18, you know it's maybe a bit of a wider pitch. Versus sometimes you will see that line almost inside the 18, and that will tell you that it is not a wide pitch. And so right away, you do have a way to kind of have that little reminder of how wide of a pitch you're playing with. And if it's not a very wide pitch, chances are it's not a very long pitch either.
I didn't know that little 10-yard line was a thing until like a couple seasons ago.
Mm-hmm.
My mind was blown. I've been watching soccer since I was like 5 years old and had never really noticed that. But yeah, it's on basically every pitch, and you're totally right, Taylor. It is a gauge to understand, to comprehend the dimensions of the pitch. I've even seen pitches where they don't have it because they basically just treat the edge of the box as the 10-yard line. Which
NYCFC's, when they play at Yankee Stadium, is actually inside the goal. Controversially, that's how narrow that field is. But yeah, they make you. They find
the thing is, I wasn't even sure you were joking until midway through that joke. That's how narrow that pitch is.
And I think there is like occasionally special dispensation, and I'm not sure they're supposed to be. Like I think there was an NWSL game. It was in, I think, Hope Solo's litany of complaints against the league, where they played in like the outfield of a baseball field, and it was like 40 yards wide and maybe 80 yards long. Like it was a teeny tiny pitch to have 22 players trying to play.
Yeah,
but generally, to your point, you have the minimum standards, and then with the international level, there are even higher minimum standards, basically.
SoFi Stadium has to be.
It's too small.
It's too narrow, isn't it? Because that's why it couldn't host the World Cup final. And I presume it's going to be expanded for the World Cup, but I don't think that work has happened yet. But yet we had the Nations League semi-finals and final there in March. So I'm not entirely sure how they're getting away with that. FIFA's just turning a blind eye to that whole thing.
Yeah, money, suitcases of cash will make FIFA be okay with certain redesigned pitch dimensions. Let's talk about the evolution of soccer pitches for a moment, Graham, because you mentioned the 90s, maybe even the early 2000s, as being sort of a different era, and I do think that is fundamentally true. But we've seen a ton of evolution in the construction of pitches. We've seen evolution in the actual like makeup of the pitch itself, and then the maintenance and the technology that goes into it. Where should we begin?
Let's start with some of the like drainage and heating things, because that's something that I think you can sort of trace back to the like late 80s, early 90s is when that starts to come in. So first of all, you need drainage to ensure that the pitch doesn't flood. This is something that the infamous Dumbarton FC pitch doesn't have, and let's just say you can tell. But most pitches will have drainage underneath the pitch that funnels water. And anyone who has watched a match at Old Trafford, which I know you've done multiple times, Taylor, which is to your detriment this season or recently, but you'll have noticed that there is quite a steep slope on all sides of the pitch, and that's actually because the pitch is raised to create space for the drainage underneath, because apparently the ground the stadium was built on back in the day was too solid to drill down into. So now they have the technology that if they were building that stadium again, there wouldn't be that raised elevation. But that's the reason there is that elevation on the Old Trafford pitch. So underneath the pitch, there's all the drainage. You also have all the undersoil heating as well, and I think all pitches at elite level, certainly in Europe where there's like colder weather. I don't know about like, does Inter Miami's pitch have undersoil heating? Do they need it?
I'm
not entirely sure.
Yeah.
So maybe there are some climates where they don't need it, but over here in Europe, most pitches, all pitches actually at elite level have undersoil heating, and this is a very low level heating system. So if you were to touch the pitch, you wouldn't like your hand wouldn't sizzle. But it's a very low level heating system. that allows teams to continue to play through the winter when otherwise the pitch would freeze. And undersoil heating is really, really expensive. Firstly, to install, I read that it costs around $1.5 million for like a base level system. Some Premier League systems are worth like $10 million. That's how much you can spend on this system. And then I also read that every time you use it for like just a few hours, it can cost as much as like $3,000. So Stirling Albion, our pitch is pretty decent. We've got good drainage, best lower league pitch in Scotland. I think most people would agree. We do not have undersoil heating because we do not have $3,000 to spare every time you turn it on.
And that can be because you have to deal with freezing temperatures consistently enough that you need to be able to kind of thaw the pitch without having to use a flamethrower. That technology is maybe not ideal in the modern era.
We've got one of those, though, so it's fine.
Okay, good. But then also, from my reading, you can use underground heating, under pitch heating, under soil heating, to extend growing life. So then you can have warmer soil that is then going to facilitate grass growth, so you can grow grass longer into the winter or throughout the winter, basically. So it serves a dual purpose there. The drainage evolution, I think, is really fascinating because I think historically, and at least like when I was growing up, it was basically you would just put a crown on the pitch so that the center of the pitch would always be a little bit higher than the corner flags, and that way, naturally, the water was kind of draining off to the sides. But then you'd have pitches that were almost like a pitcher's mound that were like significantly higher in the middle than they were at the ends. And so when you can then do more with installing actual drainage, the way fields are constructed now, where you have more sand laying down as the initial kind of layer and then as multiple layers throughout, so that sand is facilitating drainage away from the surface. There's just a lot more done to ensure that you don't have giant inconsistencies in the way the pitch is sort of laid. It makes a huge difference. It allows then the surface to kind of stay drier longer or stay as wet as you need it to be, as much as the sensors are telling you it needs to be. But then you're not having so much torn up. You're not having huge chunks ripped out constantly because it's so wet. So it's all about, I think, allowing grass to be there longer and allowing yourself to regrow grass as quickly as you can.
Yeah, and the drainage systems in the modern age are really like elaborate. Do you remember them? Wimbledon's collapsed like this season, early in the season.
No,
and,
what?
Yeah, we spoke about this on the show. The Wimbledon
pitch,
the AFC Wimbledon pitch, collapsed, and so their fans had to raise like £100,000 to fix it. That was due to the drainage. So they had a downpour. There was some kind of like, Ryan would be able to tell you more about this, but some kind of like cloggage in a part of it, and so it built up and then collapsed. And so you got an insight, like you could see down into the drainage and how much piping there is down there, and how much is funneling water away to different parts, another part of the stadium, or some kind of like, I guess like drainage like store, or would they put the water in the sewer? I don't know. It's funneling that water away, but it looks expensive, and it is expensive.
Also quite expensive are like advanced circulation systems, which can just be fans that you put on top of the pitch, or fans that are kind of installed above the ground. But you can also have like greater underground circulation, or even like below the pitch circulation to help improve root health and to combat like fungal diseases and fungal growth. If you've got wet, heated ground for too long, that's when mushrooms form. Fun as it would be to forage on the pitch of Old Trafford, I don't think people really want that necessarily. So you just have all of these different variations in approach and technology that I think allow you to have beautiful carpets, essentially, for most of the season. And that's not even getting into the ridiculous technology you have over here. I don't know if you have, like pitches that can be driven out into the sun the way you do at, say, I think it's Dallas Stadium, where you can lift the ground up and move it outside so that it gets sunlight, and then they move it back into the dome afterwards.
Do you remember the one at the Japan South Korea World Cup 2002? Was it the Sapporo Dome? I think had that as well, where you could move the entire pitch out the back of the stadium. I am not aware of. I mean, Tottenham's is pretty close, right? It goes. Or is it the Bernabeu? Tottenham's does something. They can move that pitch out for like events, but Real Madrid's goes down. Remember they like excavated this giant hole, and then now the pitch moves down, and they have like UV lights underground. It's like an underground car park, but for the pitch.
Yep.
And so then they can host events. So that's the point we've got to. That is obviously exceptionally rare. We definitely don't have that at Fourth Bank. But at Real Madrid and Tottenham, where they've got €2 billion and pound stadiums, yeah.
And what all this, like, speaks to is the commonality of human experience, if you'll forgive me, because we talked about this before we started recording, Graham, how people with their lawns are so into it once they get into it. And it's, oh, I use this fertilizer. Oh, that fertilizer's crap. You got to use this one. Oh, I got this mower because you got to do this. Oh, you got to run lights. You got to do this. You got to pick that up. And I like that doesn't go away. It just magnifies as you get more money more footprint. Yeah, that's all it is. It's just, I just picture Florentino Perez, like their stadium drives outside. Ours must go into the sky. Like, it's just people trying to outdo each other at a certain point is kind of how it feels with all the technology being implemented.
Yeah, totally. And there's a very good piece in The Athletic this week by Matt Slater, which is titled "Secrets of a Wembley Groundsman," and it's essentially about the effort and the technology and everything that goes into keeping the pitch at Wembley Stadium in tip-top condition. And while reading that article, and I would recommend listeners go and read that article, that is the thing that struck me, was like, I have neighbours who are like this. They just don't have as much money. They just don't have access to the Wembley pitch. But it's something that people are very passionate about. And you can see that in the quality of the surfaces. I mentioned Stirling Albion a couple of times. That's just because that's my experience. The groundsman at Stirling Albion was a guy until fairly recently called Graham Glenn. And he was excellent. And the Stirling Albion pitch was his complete pride and joy. Like, he was there every single day. I'd play fives on a Thursday night. You would see him. He would be doing works over the summer. Pretty much at that level anyway. I mean, Premier League clubs have like staff of 20 and 30 people, but at our level, he's doing it pretty much on his own. And so that's like relatable to, as you say, the human experience, because that's what people do with their lawns. I'm not one of those people, but I can relate.
There's a line in there. Like, I think this connects, but like Patton Oswalt, the comedian, talks about how like different comic book culture is now in the present era versus back when you didn't have the internet, essentially. And so if you wanted to know, wait, who is that character's like uncle and why is that important or whatever, like you had to know. You had to have read that comic book or know somebody who read that comic book, whereas now you can just Google it and you will have that information. And so you had to have this like incredibly specified knowledge that put you into this rare stratosphere of nerd. And I appreciate that still exists in terms of grass growth and field maintenance. And I just picture those the head of maintenance, the head of grass growth, I'm sure that exists somewhere, just going around the world and talking to different people about different strands of grass and strains of grass and whatever, and like figuring out which one exactly is going to be the most durable and how to kind of crossbreed them. Because that is another element that plays into the technology, is specialized grass strains bred for sports use, for durability, to be disease resistant, to have greater recovery rates. It's insane that we're talking about these things and not talking about professional athletes. We're talking about grass when it comes to recovery rate and durability.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the treatments that you can do. So we've mentioned sprinkler systems already. I mean, there is still the old school stuff like pitchforks and squeegees if the pitch does get flooded before kick-off and you have 50 minutes to get water off the pitch. That happened to me once at a Scotland game where there was an absolute deluge 10 minutes before the game, and that all these ground staff they just went back to basics. They just came out with pitchforks and squeegees and tried to roll the water off the pitch before the game.
Were the pitchforks like for aeration, essentially?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so aeration, that's obviously like a very base level way to do aeration. But you also have that method where it's like this machine that goes over the top of it and takes like little cores out of the pitch, and that is essentially to get more air and water and nutrients to the grass roots. You've also got dethatching as well, which helps to get rid of like dead grass on the top of the pitch, and again allows more water and air to get to the grassroots. And you've got all kinds of like fertilization and pesticides. So yeah, it's a proper labour of love. And at the elite level, you'll have a team of groundskeepers, and it's their full-time job. And they'll maybe do the training ground stuff as well. But that's what they do. And I know a couple of people who actually do that for a full-time living, and they're properly into it, like properly passionate about it.
From talking to those people from your own knowledge, Graham, who are the clubs then that you think of as being particularly known for the quality of their pitch? My limited research pointed to the exact teams that you would expect to be known for the quality of their pitch.
Is Arsenal in there?
Yep.
Are they one of the teams? Yeah, so Arsenal have always been famous for the quality of their pitch, going back to when their pitch at Highbury was called the carpet. They used to call that. And I think a lot of the like things like when they were building the Emirates Stadium, like the stadium orientation was taken into consideration, so that some stadiums have like these roofs that they don't really take into account how sunlight's going to get to the pitch, and that's why you will have the lamps brought out onto the pitches to compensate for that. I think Arsenal were keen not to have that, and so the orientation of the Emirates is designed to get sunlight onto the pitch. PSG were another one that came out in my research. They hired a man called Jonathan Calderwood from Aston Villa a couple of years ago when he had been groundskeeper of the year 2 years in a row. Weirdly, like British groundskeepers seem to be the pitch equivalent of Brazilian wingers or something. Real Madrid have a British groundskeeper, Atletico Madrid, PSG, the head FIFA groundskeeper who is in charge of making sure all the tournament pitches, so like at World Cups and I guess the Club World Cup this summer, the person that will be in charge of that is a Scottish guy called Alan Ferguson. So I don't know if that's because we're particularly lawn proud as a nation. I would have thought that's universal, but maybe we're particularly lawn proud in the UK.
I feel like when you combine like lawn pride with we invented the game, or we perfected the game in Scotland's case, like you roll those together, and I plus like the British reputation for like fastidiousness and rule following, like maybe you roll all those together and you've got, I don't know, people inspecting grounds with monocles being like, this simply must be dethatched.
I read a Guardian article about the British talent in pitch care, and the pitcher was Jonathan Calderwood, the guy I just mentioned, PSG groundsman, literally like on the ground, completely. It looked like he was face planting, staring at the grass. And this is a passage from that article. I'm quoting this now. When it comes to sports turf management, the UK is a talent factory like no other. This is a quote here. We're 10 years more advanced than anywhere else in the world, Richard Hayden, author of FIFA's official handbook on pitch maintenance, told me. If you want to work in technology, you go to Silicon Valley. Well, the UK is the Silicon Valley of turf. So there you go. Apparently it's something that we do particularly well and export it around the world.
Credit to you. There you go.
It's all we've got, Taylor. It's all we've got. Brexit stripped the rest, but we've still got turf.
And better chocolate, allegedly, says Graham.
That's true.
So I've been told. That's fascinating. We should mention, before we round things out, you do obviously then have, we talked about it briefly, the plastic pitches, the development of artificial turf technology, which has then led into hybrid turf system, which still confuse me, where you have natural grass combined with synthetic fibers that basically give them greater strength and stability while still kind of reflecting a more natural playing surface. You have a variety in terms of the artificial pitch itself, what it's constructed by, what's underneath it. I think you've had variation over the years as like some stuff has been proven to be particularly not good for your health. There was like coconut fiber for a period of time. I don't know if that is still... That was probably 10 years ago at this point, so I'm sure that is like massively out of date and no one uses that anymore because that's how quickly things seem to change. But essentially, with artificial pitches, you have places that maybe couldn't play games at certain points, now able to have them. It's certainly a cheaper thing, so you don't have to kind of keep grass year-round. You've got this facility. You know the turf's going to be there. Turf still requires maintenance, don't get me wrong. If you've ever played at a bad indoor facility where all the little black pebbles have like kind of accumulated up against the wall. And those are bad for you as well. So that was one of the things I was alluding to. You still have to do some maintenance, but certainly you don't have as many people laying face down in the turf inspecting it with their monocles and magnifying glasses.
No, it's probably unhealthy. Yeah, artificial pitches are, we kind of call them, we've spoken about this on the show, we would over here call them like AstroTurf pitches, even when AstroTurf is a brand name. It's a bit like how I always call my Dyson vacuum cleaner a Hoover. Like even when it's not an AstroTurf pitch, it'll get called an AstroTurf pitch over here. But anyway,
you should call it a Dyson.
Well, you know, speaking of Brexit, not my favourite person. But anyway, they're quite controversial, not Dyson's, artificial pitches over here. In Scotland, we voted to ban them from the top division really recently. They're being phased out over the next couple of years. Players always make this argument that players are adamant about this, so I'm not actually discounting it. They contribute to more injuries, players will argue. The data is cloudy on that. It's inconclusive on that. Some of the data actually kind of contradicts that and says that artificial pitches are better. But yeah, players are pretty unanimous on this. And my main complaint is that they look terrible, particularly as they get older. I think Seattle's pitch at this point has to be due do a refresh, do a relay, because it looks grey basically on the TV whenever I watch games at CenturyLink or whatever it's called these days. I also think like the flow of the game, they slow down the game a little bit more. The ball bounces a bit higher. It just rolls a bit slower. But for a lot of teams, they are much more cost effective because they require, as you say, Taylor, less maintenance and upkeep. And you might also play at a stadium, to the Seattle point, that doubles as an NFL stadium, and so you have to double up on what that pitch is being used for. And then in like the Scottish lower leagues, last season we were the only team in our league. We got relegated out of League One, but in League One last season we were the only grass pitch team. Every other club had artificial pitches, and the reason for that, they're cheaper to maintain. But also a lot of these teams will rent out their pitches for like during the week use. So if you're like a local team, you can, Stenhousemuir do this, you can use their pitch during the week, which is a lot easier to do if it's a plastic pitch over a grass one. So there are reasons for them. I understand why they're in place, but I think a good grass pitch is always better than a good artificial pitch.
1000% agree on that one. Artificial turf, I think, is just hotter. It's harder to get a natural bounce. It's harder to get a natural kick. You always are just aware. I feel like I'm going to slip. I always kind of just have that little more caution when playing on artificial turf. But Graham, you've also managed to ruin Dyson for me at the same time. So thank you for that. Did not know his political leanings and background. So thank you.
Oh, he's
thank you to you and not Sir James Dyson.
He's one of the forefathers of the Brexit tax dodge.
And then immediately moving to Singapore. My research shows me.
Great guy.
Good stuff. Yeah. Seems lovely. Graham, what is the best pitch you've played
on? So I played a media game at Hampden one time, and it was amazing. And, like, relatively speaking, the Hampden pitch really isn't that great. I don't even think it's hybrid. So one thing we didn't mention is that the cost of a hybrid pitch is like $2 million. It's ridiculous. Like, the elite level Premier League clubs will have them. The elite level European clubs, I bet MLS clubs have them. Below that level, like, Hampden doesn't have a hybrid pitch. Certainly when I played on it, it seemed like a grass pitch. And it was right at the end of the season as well, so it was a little bit ropey in places. But for me, it was still amazing. It was completely flat for a starter. I'd never played on a completely flat pitch in my life before. So, yeah, I'll remember that experience.
That is interesting. I have played on 2 professional pitches now that you mentioned the media game. Neither one was my favorite. I'm not going to lie. You are right that like the flatness and uniformity of the grass and just that there aren't those like divots and bumps and clusters of grass is a unique phenomenon. It is like playing on a carpet. I feel like I played on some of those like fully flat carpeted but like really nice pitches at youth level, and some of like the higher, like Dallas Cup I think was played on really nice pitches, and those like loom large in my memory. But Audi Field, not surprisingly, came up in chunks and was way too soft, I think. And the Richmond Kickers one that I've played on a couple years ago was very hard. And I think because it's surrounded by used to be surrounded by like a concrete running track and a concrete bowl, I think radiated heat, and so it's really, really hard to keep moisture in it and in that ground, I think, because it was built in like the 1910s. So I think that's another one where it ended up feeling pretty hard when you came down and not as like spongy and soft as the grass might indicate.
The Audi Field one is interesting just because you would think they would have money. I mean, you can't tell with the team that DC United put together, but nonetheless, as an MLS team, you would think they would have like a good, like a high quality pitch. What was it, like, overwatered, or like what was the issue?
Yeah, it felt overwatered. It felt sort of like you know when turf is laying and then it's kind of growing, but you can feel that it's kind of not quite like rooted down.
Oh, it's not quite. Yeah, it's not quite rooted in yet.
Yeah, it didn't have that like stability.
What time of the year would this have been at?
Summer, I think. I can't remember. It was a media game. It was the media game. It was like the Republicans versus Democrats game where they like basically had like politicians on both sides, but then former athletes and then random people. And I guess needed someone to play, so I got thrown into the Republican side, which was new to me and very uncomfortable. And the Republican Congress people could not figure out why everybody kept booing them. So it was fun times. It was an interesting time where I had to keep kind of being like, I don't love my red jersey, but I get to play soccer. And I think like that was the one that had like Aleko Eskandari and a lot of ex-pros on it, and they were fun to play with and quite good at the same time.
Did you get to use like the changing facilities or like locker rooms or whatever?
It was cool. That was very cool. Yeah. And they had like a nice little spread there. for people who were playing. That was pretty neat. And they had some former DC guys who were like Tony Sana. I got to play. No, I think he was a coach. He wasn't playing, but it was cool because he's a legend in my eyes, at least. So that was fun. But the pitch itself was not great. I played okay though. That was fun. I think I had an assist.
Did they have different spreads for the Democrat and Republican side? Democrat is like tofu. Republicans, well, the Republicans like just American burgers. Or...
Yes, yeah, just that. Dan Crenshaw was on the team, and I think had to be warned by the referee right away for like coming in 2-footed on people. He did that a couple times. It was an interesting one, an interesting game. But yeah, I think the ideal is natural grass that has kind of been there and grown for a while, but is flat and is sort of uniform in its consistency. That's always going to be ideal. But natural grass, even just walking on your bare feet, is always lovely. Even if I don't love a grass yard, I will always take a grass pitch.
Yeah. Oh, I did take a couple shots in the Stirling Albion pitch when we won the title, and we invaded the pitch at full time, and there was a ball kind of, and it was an empty goal. I had to. You just have to. So I took a shot, and that was nice. So I've scored at Fourth Bank, even if my team itself didn't actually do a whole lot of that this season.
Legend. Graham Ruthven could have kept them up, or could have gotten the promotion, one or the other.
Yeah, nobody's sure. We haven't worked out the playoffs yet.
But we are sure that people take grass and technology and grass growth very, very seriously. And I am glad they do, because it makes for a better sport, and I think it makes for a more aesthetically pleasing sport as well, as opposed to being played in a mud bowl, though there is some appeal to that as well occasionally. Graham Ruthven, thank you for talking it all out with me today. I've enjoyed our non-uniform discussion of the lack of uniformity in modern pitches.
Thank you, Taylor Rockwell, and thank you to your neighbour as well who joined us for this episode. You can go back to mowing his lawn now.
It's wonderful that you think people around here still mow their own lawns, Graham. I think I am the lone Luddite holdout who continues to enjoy mowing my lawn.
Ryan Bailey, your neighbour?
Exactly. You got it. There you go. Listeners, thank you all for listening. We appreciate it very much. Go check on your grass, and we'll talk to you next week.